Gigi Berardi, reading FoodWISE. Continuing with this section, we started yesterday, efficiency, mega scale, agriculture outcompetes, or I guess it was 2 days ago. So I'm going to read a page and then talk about an article via the Associated Press that appeared in the Anchorage Daily News. Back to efficiencies. Efficiencies of scale also operate in other kinds of agribusiness in the overall agricultural web, namely for suppliers, transporters, processors, and marketers. The clear trend is that both farms and these support businesses are consolidating and getting bigger and bigger. Here in the United States, the pattern has been consolidation by purchase of smaller farms and companies into larger conglomerates with high degrees of specialization and centralized production and warehousing. According to the Internal Revenue Service, such concentration takes advantage of federal tax incentives. Further, the increasing size of US-based global agribusinesses is part of the reason that most current growth in US agriculture comes from international market expansion. However, this growth weakens community resilience by reducing the diversity and scale of food sources. Smaller agribusiness operations face heavy competition from large firms in pricing and therefore suffer declining profit margins. Impacts on small farms have been a concern of mine for some time. Years back, I became particularly interested in the history of how labor, profitability, social consciousness, and community structure were changing as farming changed. I parlayed these studies into a book with Professor Charles C. Geisler of Cornell, researching the social consequences of agricultural technologies. A common situation I found was agricultural technology for the privileged few and tasteless and standardized food for the masses. The machine harvesting of tomatoes was a particularly important case study in this regard. I persisted on this track and became something of a research geek, studying subjects as varied as the problems of small-scale tobacco growers, cotton harvesting in Oklahoma, how the introduction of mules to thresh grains in the early 1900s spelled disaster for many small farmers who could not afford mules, and the first inklings of problems with a new field called biogenetic technology, now known as genetic engineering. I saw in the mule technology case a pattern that continues today. Not all farmers can afford the newest technology, and so with each new development, the structure of agriculture, the percentage of large-scale farmers growing a particular percentage of food changes forever. Farms become bigger and fewer, and the fewer produce more. Farm communities change. The article tonight talks about meat. Talks about meat supply, meat processing, meat demand. And the author quotes Jason Lusk, who is head of agricultural economics at Purdue. And he says that beef and pork processing capacity is down 40%. This is not exactly a shocker. We've been hearing about this in many different ways, in many different sources, but mostly popular press for a while. But this is a stark statistic. Now, if some of us are eating 150 pounds of beef and pork a year, and there is some compromise to our food supply chain, we're probably not going to suffer very much, no matter what our percent reduction in meat consumption is. But if it's 0 pounds a year, then 0 of 0 isn't very good. And so once again, we come up with a general principle here that coronavirus is not really the great equalizer so much as the great revealer of disparity, of inequality. But actually, as I've said before with dairy and other aspects of the food chain, so the meat packing industry is going to shut down, really, with coronavirus. I guess it's considered an essential industry because there's an executive order now mandating that some qualifier of meat processing plants need to be online, need to be in business, need to stay open, need to reopen. And I ask, okay, I mean, that sounds okay to me, as long as there are safety precautions and and protective gear in place for the workers, and not just that, probably increased salary, and not just that, probably breaks, I don't know, with that heavy equipment. I know as an EMT that I can barely stand that super hydrated air wearing the right kind of mask. And I can just imagine for someone who is going to be wearing it for 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day. Maybe it should be 4 hours a day, and people get paid for 8 hours a day. Maybe the break should be every 20 minutes. Every 20 minutes for 20 minutes. I'm not saying people have to be locked up in a meat processing plant, but whatever it takes right now, as long as people are remunerated and protected. And the article goes on to talk about panic buying for meat, but somehow McDonald's is having no problems. Really? So not a shocker there. So I guess we have to ask questions about the sources of the meat, why it doesn't seem to be a problem for McDonald's. But at the very least, I want to say too that we really don't need to rely on fake meat either as a solution to all this. And I will talk about fake meat in another blog, but the thumbnail for this video shows a bean stew that my partner made tonight, which was absolutely delicious. And that, at least tonight, is my alternative to meat.